So across the street, and you can see a little bit of it here. It's a brick building.
Yeah.
Behind all of these shrubs. When the leaves fall, you can see it better. But that is the Jonesville Academy. It was a private school, and they started it in 1836. They had 189 students. Where did everybody stay? Because all we're seeing is the women's dormitory. There was a larger complex of buildings here. Some of them are gone. They're gone. And there's a wonderful image. It's a print that shows the Jonesville Academy in the 1850s. And in that print, you can see the other buildings that were around it. Those three buildings are all that remain. And the porch that you see on there is not original to the building. That was put on by the present owners. So I want to talk about this house across the street. In fact, the lady who owns it is with us today. But that home was originally occupied by Hiram Wilson. And he was the principal for the Jonesville Academy from 1841 to 1861. So for 20 years, he served as principal, and he lived in this house for most of the time. We figure the house was built right around 1850. We know it was built before 1856 because it appears on the 1856 map of Jonesville. And so Hiram Wilson and his wife lived there until 1861, and then they sold it to a guy by the name of Stratton. I can't remember his first name. I'm going to check my sheet. J.B. Stratton, okay? And he was a Methodist minister, and he lived here from 1861 until he died in 1863, and then his wife, Lorena, lived here for some years afterwards. He was the Methodist Church minister for the Grooms Methodist Church, which is on Vischer Ferry Road. He was involved with the church here, and he gave benediction one night in 1861 and went home and died. And we'll see, he's buried in the Jonesville Cemetery. A lot of these people we're going to be talking about, you're going to see them in the cemetery. This little house behind the apple tree was originally the one-room schoolhouse for Jonesville. Okay? And so, you know, when they stopped using this, when they started using the old academy building for the public school, the old one-room schoolhouse was abandoned, and somebody bought it and turned it into a house. So, you know, they put some additions on it and things like this, but this was originally the one-room schoolhouse, and we have a number of one-room schoolhouses in Clifton Park that still exist. And I think it was 2 years ago we put all of the remaining one-room schoolhouses on our historic register for the town. The bells from the schoolhouses hang in the bell court at the Shenendehowa School in front of the high school. There's a bell tower, and it's got all the bells from the one-room schoolhouses. And I think the one from the Jonesville Academy is there in that bell tower. I might add that many of the houses that I'm pointing out to you are on our Clifton Park Register of Historic Places. And if you go to the town's website, there is an interactive map where you have pictures of all of these places, a little bit of the history of each place, and it shows you where they're located in the town. So if you're interested in finding out more about some of our town's historic structures, I invite you to go to the website and find that map. And that's hopefully we'll figure out a way that it'll be easier for you to spot that map. It used to be right on the opening page, but I understand they've moved it someplace else now. But it's there, so and it's kind of fun to play with. All of our historic markers are on there, and all of our cemeteries are on that interactive map. So if you're history buffs, enjoy. So this wonderful Greek Revival house that we're standing in front of was built by was built by Eliphalet and Lydia King in 1842. And It's sort of an early example of Greek revival because it has some federal characteristics, like that wonderful oval fan light up in the pediment. The federal architecture really made use of the oval. That's where you have the circular staircases and you have the half-quarter round windows in the gable ends. Anyway, that's a hangover from the federal period. It's a beautiful Greek revival building, and it's a fairly early one. 1842 was early for Greek revival here in Clifton Park. Most of the Greek revival buildings date to the 1850s. So King was an early settler. He was here early on, and he bought land from James Jones, the original settler. But they didn't build this house until about 1842. And we'll see where he ended up, too, in the Jonesville Cemetery. He has a rather large monument, so he was probably an important person. He probably participated in a lot of civic and governmental duties here in Jonesville. I want to point out the house next to it on the left, because that is also a Greek revival house, although it doesn't have the portico. You didn't have to have that Greek revival portico for it to be Greek revival. So what they did with the Greek revival period, they turned the house around and put the main entrance in the gable section. So the gable faced the road now. In the prior styles of architecture, it was the long section that was on the road. So they put the main doorway in the gable section. And in the earlier Greek revival, they were still talking about symmetry, so they had a little wing on either side of the gable section, like you have on the house on the right. But later on, they only had the wing on one side. So that's a typical Greek revival form, with the gable end towards the street and a little wing off to one side. Or if it's early, you'd have it balanced with a wing on the other side as well. So this house next to it was probably built in the 1850s. I think it's on the 1856 map, so it was built before then. And then the house next to it on the left is actually sort of a Gothic revival house. And it's hard to see the architectural features because they've resided it and they've sided over all of the architectural features. And it could be board and batten in there, which is quite frequent with Gothic revival architecture. You had the vertical boards and then the battens between them. My guess is that if you took off that siding, that's what you'd see. And that center dormer is very typical of Gothic revival. Again, the emphasis on the vertical, and there must have been a window. I bet there was a really nice window there with Gothic trim over it. So sometimes, you know, these houses have been remodeled, and it's hard to see what might have been there at one time. Okay, so Dr. John McElroy was Jonesville's country doctor. He actually served all of Clifton Park. He started his practice here in Jonesville in 1893, and he was the town doctor until 1954. Yeah, long time. And this was his office here. This yellow building was Dr. McElroy's office. Now, he actually had a farm he lived on. Yes! McElroy Road, just up there a ways. And we do have a historic marker in front of the building, so you know where his farm was, because he was really big in animal husbandry. He was one of the judges at the county fair in Ballston Spa. He raised all sorts of prize cattle and chickens, hens, whatever. And he was also a member of the Beagle Club, Beagle dogs. And there's pictures of him with these other beagle enthusiasts with all of their hunting dogs and their picture with their hunting outfits surrounded by their hunting dogs. So he was a well-known character in town, and many of your older people in town were brought into this world by Dr. McElroy. The town recently acquired his one-horse buggy that he used to make house calls in the late 19th and early 20th century. And eventually, when we get the blacksmith shop restored at the Historic Grooms Tavern, we'll have a place to exhibit that. So the house next door belonged to the Kingsley family. Joseph Kingsley and his wife, whose name was Harriet, Joseph Kingsley and Harriet. And that building was built before 1856, probably sometime between 1850 and 1856. And that too is a Greek Revival building. And what's nice is it has not been recited, so you can see the architectural features. So you can see the corner pilasters, which is a Greek Revival characteristic. You can see the frieze windows, those small windows that are in the back addition upstairs. Those are in the area that would be the frieze of a Greek temple. And you'll see those on Greek Revival buildings, especially if it's only a story and a half. They would use those frieze windows. Some people call them eyebrow windows because they look like the eyebrows of the windows below. Or some people call them belly windows because you have to lay on your belly to look out of them. But that's it. Now, this house in back of us has an interesting story because it's an original building here in Jonesville, and you can see it too as Greek Revival. It's got the Greek Revival pilasters on the corner. It's got your frieze windows up above on the second story in the back there. And this was a house that was redone, and the Historic Preservation Commission worked with the owner to make sure that it was done tactfully. And so that's why these pilasters don't look like they're supporting the architrave of the roof, because he made it a little taller. They made it a little taller to give them more room upstairs, but they did a good job without really impacting too much on the structure. He made house calls. So across the street, we have a major Greek Revival structure, which was built by Elisha and Rachel Shepherd in 1855. And you can tell this guy had some money because that's a pretty good sized home, and it's built of brick. And again, it's that typical Greek Revival form, gable end towards the street, wing off to the side, the same as the building to the left. It's a little smaller. This guy was a working class person, but he still had a little Greek house to live in, again with the gable end and a little story and a half wing off to one side, probably built in the 1850s. So why were people building houses that looked like Greek temples? Well, you have to think of the culture at the time. Our country was young, and we were basing the government on the Greek and Roman systems of government. People were enamored of ancient civilizations, the Greeks and the Romans, and they considered themselves as successors to these civilizations, you know, right after the Constitution was ratified, the federal period. And so they were building houses that looked like Greek temples. The women were wearing these high-waisted dresses that you'd see on ancient pieces of Greek pottery. People were sitting in chairs that looked like Greek klysmos chairs, also illustrated on ancient Greek pottery. So everything was Greek and Roman. And again, people thought that we were the heirs of those ancient civilizations. A lot of archaeology work was being redone at the time. Pompeii was being rediscovered. So people were really into this. Right here on this lot where we're standing used to be the Oddfellows Hall, which came down in the 1970s. And then on that blank lot over there was the Jonesville Hotel. Okay, that was the hotel that was built by James Jones. And you can see it's right here at this intersection. The Waterford Turnpike made a right and then went up Long Kill Road. So it was a great place for the hotel. And that was a landmark here until 1915. Okay, there was a huge fire. And in fact, they worked hard to save the store. They were afraid that the store would go. But at any rate, the hotel is gone. Nothing has been built on the lot since. It's used for a parking lot now. The store, of course, came shortly after the hotel. People had to have a place to go to buy food and stuff. And actually, the original store is the rear wing. So, and that was built probably in the late 1840s, early 50s, and it was up closer where the present store is. And when they built the new section in about 1900, what they did was they just pushed the original store back, and it became the wing on the back of the store. So I brought pictures of the hotel and the Oddfellows Hall. It was on this site, and a couple pictures of the store. I didn't expect a crowd this big. But this book is also available at the town hall. And all of these books are also available at the library. So, okay. So Roushus R. Kennedy, that's a mouthful. He actually lived just beyond the store, and he was probably Jonesville's first citizen. So it was Roushus R. Kennedy, who was one of the founders of the Jonesville Academy. He was one of the founders of the Jonesville Cemetery, and he also founded the Plank Road Turnpike. So what happened was part of the Waterford Turnpike was planked over in 1849, and that was the section from Route 9, there by the old Clifton Park Hotel, and then it came up here to Jonesville. Welcome to the Jonesville Rural Cemetery. So this is the bell I was telling you about. That's from Grace Episcopal Church. Now, the Jonesville Cemetery is on the National Register of Historic Places. You passed our brand new sign down there as you came. Also, the general store, which is now a pizza place, is also on the National Register of Historic Places. We have 10 places in Clifton Park that are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And then, of course, we have our own town register of historic places, and we have 64 places on that. So don't let anybody tell you there's no history in Clifton Park. The bell came back to Clifton Park, and this was a very appropriate place to hang it. It's still in Jonesville, and they have it here at the entrance to the cemetery. And it probably has the date here when it was installed. I can't remember the date right now. But it can be rung with a remote. Yes. And so when they have funerals, as the cortege comes into the cemetery, they will ring the bell. So it's a nice touch. So what happened was the rural cemetery movement was very popular in the 19th century. It started out in France, and what they did was to create a park-like setting with winding paths and hills and interesting monuments to read and look at. It was a place for the living as well as for the deceased, and a lot of picnics were held in cemeteries. Just when I was dating my wife, we would picnic in cemeteries. Of course, we were a little weird. But they did that in the 19th century. And a lot of them happened right about the time of the American Civil War, because you had a lot of soldiers dying in battle, and they were coming home to be buried. So a lot of people started the rural cemetery movement in their own places at that time. So this happened in 1864. And as I said, Roushus R. Kennedy was involved with this as well. And so they had a landscape architect whose name was Burton Arnold Thomas. Burton Arnold Thomas. He was from West Sand Lake, and he was the landscape architect who designed the Jonesville Rural Cemetery. And we have the original map for that, watercolor map. It's beautiful, and it shows where the trails were to go, and it's pretty much the way it is today, the 1864 map, which was laid out. And Burton Arnold Thomas was also the landscape architect for Vale Cemetery in Schenectady, that some of you maybe know about. Also, the Green Hill Cemetery in Amsterdam, which was 1858. The Vale Cemetery was 1857. So he had a good reputation when he was hired to come to Jonesville to design this. He later worked at the Albany Rural Cemetery, and his son Jeffrey followed him. So, you know, it's kind of interesting that this small rural cemetery here in Jonesville was designed by this big deal landscape architect. The two entrances to the cemetery. This is the main entrance here where the bell is, and we'll be just walking around, making a loop, and we'll be coming out the lower entrance. So let's take a look. So this is a wonderful vantage spot. You get a nice overview of the Jonesville Cemetery. We're up on the hill. The monument in back of you is for Oliver Waite. Anybody here in Clifton Park familiar with Waite Road? Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, it was named for this guy. His home was on the corner of Waite Road and 146. And the house is still there. It sits up on a knoll there on the corner. And that's why that road is called Waite Road, after him. And we have this wonderful photograph of his house back in the 1880s with his whole family out in front of it. But anyway, he has a very nice monument here in the cemetery. And what we're going to do is, you know, like in regular life, the hoi polloi are treated a little differently. So they get the prime spots on the hill overlooking the peons down below. So we're going to visit the hoi polloi first, and then we'll go down and see the peons, okay? So the cemetery is run by a cemetery association, and you'll see sometimes they've placed signs here where the stones have become illegible so that you can read it. Unfortunately, due to acid rain, sometimes the inscriptions are very difficult to read, and in some cases you'll see where they're completely washed away. So anyway, this is an effort to preserve what's on the stone. The monument to J.B. Stratton. He was the Reverend J.B. Stratton, the Methodist minister. We saw his house next to the Jonesville Academy. Well, this is where he ended up. And you'll see this marker, this bronze marker. Okay, that means he was a Methodist minister. And you'll see a number of them here in the cemetery because there's a number of ministers, Methodist ministers buried here. So this is a beautiful stone. It's a very nice condition, and it's so typical of the style of stones from 1820 to about 1840. Very classical, the weeping willow, the urn. So if you see a stone with this motif, you can pretty well date it between 1820 and 1840, maybe 1845. But this is a very typical, this weeping willow tree. You'll see these on a lot of stones for obvious reasons. But this is when they were popular. This sort of a classically inspired Greek Revival period stone. And it echoes the needlework embroideries that the ladies were doing, and also the watercolors and the lithographs that were done as memorials to the deceased. You know, it wasn't just in the cemetery. They did these wonderful watercolors, and the ladies did the needlepoint of monuments of their deceased family, and they would hang it in their house. You have the joining of two great Clifton Park families, the Kennedys and the Garnseys. The Garnseys were some of the first settlers in Clifton Park. The home of Nathan Garnsey still stands on Route 146. It has a historic marker in front of it. It was built in 1791, and that is also on the National Register. But you know, a Garnsey married a Kennedy, and they begot a son, Garnsey Kennedy. And there's an interesting story about a connection there. One of the Garnsey girls hooked up with one of the Kennedy boys, and he was not approved by her parents, and so she eloped. And the family never spoke to her after that for many, many years. And eventually they reconciled. And this whole thing is written up in Sylvester's History of Saratoga County. So here he is, right at the top of the hill, Roushus R. Kennedy, the founder of the Plank Road Turnpike, the founder of the Jonesville Academy, etc., etc. So he gets a place right at the top of the hill. My guess is some of these monuments came later in the 19th century, erected by family members. But this is his resting place. And next door is the King family. Remember, we saw Eliphalet King's house, which was that nice Greek revival house. Eliphalet King and his wife are buried here, and his children. Okay. Now, if you look down the hill, and I'm not going to take you down there, but you see the cross down there and the American flag next to it? Okay. That marks the grave of George W. Cornell. Can anybody guess what the W stands for? Yes. George Washington Cornell. And he was a school teacher. He taught at that one-room schoolhouse that we went by. And he joined the 77th during the Civil War in 1861. And he was shipped out. His friend, George Dater, who's buried over on the other side of the cemetery, was also shipped out on the 77th Regiment, and Company F, I believe it was. And so they went to Virginia, and they fought in the Peninsular Campaign down there in Virginia, around Williamsburg, that area. And many of the people didn't die in battle. They contracted disease, which is what happened with George Cornell and his friend George Dater. And they contracted typhoid. And they were so ill that they decided to send them back home. And they were sent back home on the Daniel Webster. That was the ship. And they died en route back to New York. And they're both buried here in the cemetery. That's Cornell's burial spot. His mother, Mary Ann Cornell, was a Kingsley. She was the daughter of Eliphalet Kingsley. So, small community, a lot of intermarriages. Everybody knew each other. This is Dr. McElroy's monument here. As I said, Jonesville's country doctor. We talked about him. We saw his office, and his farm is on McElroy Road. And as I say, he was involved in so many things, animal husbandry, a lot of fraternal organizations. And so that's what he has on his marker. I'm not sure what that one is. Anybody recognize the symbol? And of course, a member of the fire department, etc. So anyway, this is, and then the Cemetery Association in 2014 put this little seating area in. Adam Mock, he was a longtime supervisor here in town. He was a justice of the peace, and he became supervisor. And he was from over in Rensselaer County, but he made his home here in Clifton Park later on and became town supervisor. So his home, which still stands, but it's heavily modified, is on Vischer Ferry Road across from the Common. It's, I think it's an attorney's office or something now, if anybody's familiar with that. And here's the grave of George Cornell that we saw from above. And here's some more of the hubs. These are the earlier hubs down here. from Hub's Corners. And do you see this this shield shape on the stone? That's what you usually find on Civil War stones, is that shield shape. And that was popular in the 1850s, 60s, and 70s. You can see them here on these stones. That's a family stone there that was put in later on, probably. That's what they did at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. They put in these big family stones that replaced the earlier stones. Look at the, you see the finger pointing up on this stone? Okay, on Lydia Hubbs's stone. That means she supposedly went to heaven, okay? I have seen, yes, I have. There are stones with it pointing down. It doesn't mean they went to the netherworld. It means that that's where they're buried, under the stone, yes. And here, look at these two stones here. You see, you had a tintype or daguerreotype or something in here that's gone. Both of these originally had their picture. So here's the founder of Jonesville. He died in 1850, 85 years old. Okay. Yeah. Now, is anybody familiar with the Jones Cemetery on Waite Road? I think it's on Waite Road, right? Yeah, Gail is. Anyway, that's his family. So that's a part of his family, the Jones Cemetery. If you go on Waite's Road, there's a historic marker there, so you can find the cemetery. But that's a lot of his family is buried there. And we actually have a sampler in the town history collection that was done by a niece of his, whose brother worked on the Erie Canal and built the Rexford Aqueduct. So there's a lot of, genealogy and interaction between families here. That's the original stone. And then this is a beautiful stone too. With, again, the urn and the weeping willow tree, the round bulb surrounded by foliage. And this is in memory of Lois, wife of James Jones, who died in 1855, 61 years old. And then it's got one of these inscriptions below, which we can't read. And that's what they put on that one sign, is a number of those things, because they're all taken from sayings or psalms. The same types of things that were put on samplers. These, by the way, if you're wondering what these little things are, these are footstones. So these mark these are headstones, these are footstones. Does anybody recognize this guy? Yeah. And I think this is a little presumptuous, but can you read that? Father of Clifton Park. Maybe of modern Clifton Park, but a lot went on here before he came around. He did, after the Northway opened to Clifton Park in 1959, he saw the possibility of people commuting from Clifton Park to Albany. So he started buying up land, and he bought this land. It's now Clifton Knolls. And he started building. Beechwood was the first section. Beechwood, I think Beechwood Drive was where he built the first homes. And what he did was he created a park-like setting. And the land was cheap. He built these big houses that, that weren't very expensive. And the taxes here were non-existent. I remember my total taxes when we moved here in 1971. $275 a year. I mean, taxes here in Clifton Park are still pretty damn low compared to our neighbors. But at any rate, so he acquired the land. He built these houses, and people came. They could commute now. They could buy these big houses in a park-like setting, get away from the city, and they didn't have to pay an awful lot for them. And he would do deals on a handshake. There was no written contracts or anything. It was all done on a handshake. And the various models of his homes were named after the contractors who built those homes. So the Stans was named after Stanley, and I can't remember what his last name was, who constructed those. Later on, he got fancy and he called it the Standish. But at any rate, and if he didn't like you at the time the closing came, he wouldn't sell to you. So he bought up 3 large farms in Clifton Park, and the northern one was the farm of Heath Peck, and that was the first. And what he would do would be to give the farmers that he bought the land from a free house in his development. The last piece of property he bought was from Vincent Sagata. Vincent Sagata was holding out. He owned the area down along Barney Road off of Grooms Road, the southern part of the Knolls, and he didn't want a house. You know, he had a house which doubled as a barn. In the winter, he'd load it with hay. And so finally, Van Patten said, well, I'll give you an apartment in the clubhouse, because there was a clubhouse there. So he agreed. Now, Jimmy Sakata created the ponds that are there in the Knolls, okay? He created the ponds, and he advertised in Albany and Schenectady for people to come out. He would stock those ponds, and he would charge them to come out and fish in those ponds. One of his requirements was that Van Patten had to keep the ponds, which he did. And so they called him Jimmy. His name was Vincent. And so he moved into the clubhouse. And he also got naming rights because he was a native Spaniard. So Van Patten let him name some of the roads. So that's why you have these Spanish-sounding names in Clifton Knolls, Par del Rio, Casablanca, etc. That was due to Jimmy Sagata. I remember when we moved here in 1971, I'd get back at this big Cadillac, and the license plate said Sagata, and he would go 20 miles an hour, and that was the fastest his car would go. I remember getting in back of it. At any rate, I think it's interesting that here we have Van Patten, and why do you think we have the tree on his monument? He was known for not leveling the property. He would leave the mature trees